Hey, I've got a question for you today on Daily Hope. Do you ever see the evil in the world, the suffering, maybe suffering in your own life or family? And do you ever wonder, if you're honest, is God paying attention? Is God going to do anything about this? I mean, there have been times in human history, you think of the persecution of the Jewish people under the Nazi rule there in Germany in the 1940s and the late 1930s, or the persecution of Jewish people in the Soviet Union, or today in parts of the Middle East. And you think, God, what are you watching? Well, in the book of Exodus, we get the true story that God's people had been slaves for about 400 years. Now, it started off, they've been in Egypt for 400 years. They weren't slaves when they started, because you may remember Joseph was Pharaoh's right-hand person. But there's a verse where it says, one day a new Pharaoh was appointed who no longer remembered Joseph. I think that's such a key verse because, in the United States, if you were to rewind even 40 years, on Sundays, almost all businesses closed down, and the vast majority of Americans went to church. In fact, it was as recent as the 1940s that 97% of Americans identified as Christian. And the question was just, are you Catholic or Protestant? But we see that change going on right now. Pharaohs and others being appointed who don't remember those Christian roots in our nation. Well, God, when it seemed like he wasn't paying attention, actually was. And a key verse in the book of Exodus is in chapter 3 when God appears to Moses. Now, Moses has been grieved that his people are slaves. Moses tried to solve the problem by his own hand. He killed an Egyptian officer. And then Moses had to flee Egypt. And for 40 years, he lived in the wilderness, and it seemed like God was not going to do anything. Then God appears to Moses in a burning bush. Verse 7, then the Lord told him, quote, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. And you should know today, if you feel like God is not paying attention, he is aware of your suffering. He always has a plan, and if you're a believer, a promise that your suffering will end. And then in verse 10, God tells Moses this, now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. And there's a principle here. What grieves you in the world, if you pray about it, if you seek God, most likely he will invite you to be part of his process of setting his people free, or setting people free from sin now by letting them know the good news of Jesus. I'll see you tomorrow for more Daily Hope.